Carb loading can be the difference between hitting the wall or finishing strong in your 70.3, but most triathletes get it completely wrong. In this video, I'll show you how to do it properly to maximize your performance. And if you're new here, then hey, my name's James and I'm a registered sports nutritionist. I work with amateur and pro triathletes to take the guesswork out of nutrition and help them to train, race, and recover faster. All right, so let's get stuck in and talk about carb loading for a 70.3. This is a favorite topic of mine because it is such a powerful tool, but it's not as straightforward as a lot of people think, and that's a good place to start. The 70.3 distance is particularly tricky for nutrition because it sits right in that middle ground. It's long enough that you need a solid fueling strategy, but intense enough that your stomach might rebel if you overdo it. And getting your carb loading right can be the difference between a strong finish and a painful shuffle to the line. Before we dive into the carb loading strategy itself, it's important to talk about the science behind it. I'm always surprised by how little people understand carb loading, even very good coaches who I've worked with. They suggest it's unnecessary, that it doesn't really improve performance, but they are so wrong. Now, the basis behind carb loading comes down to energy reserves and what you need to fuel you through a 70.3 mile race that might take you anywhere between 4 to 8 hours to complete. Your body has two main sources of energy: fats and carbohydrates. Fats are essentially unlimited when it comes to energy because the average person has over 50,000 calories worth of energy stored as fat. But carbohydrates are limited, and the average person only has about 2,500 calories worth of carbs stored in the body as glycogen, and that's only if you've carb loaded effectively to start with. When you do a 70.3, you're operating at a higher intensity than a full Ironman, which means you're going to be burning through a higher percentage of carbohydrates for energy. And here's the thing which trips people up. Since the race is shorter than an Ironman, you might think that carb loading isn't as important, but that is a critical mistake. The higher intensity actually means you'll be depleting your glycogen stores faster, making carbohydrate loading vital. By carbohydrate loading, you maximize or even exceed the usual amount of glycogen that you can store, which is extremely helpful because it reduces the chance of you bonking or hitting the wall. That's the term used to describe getting to a critically low level of glycogen in your muscles, meaning you have to reduce your pace and you'll probably feel absolutely dreadful. This typically happens during the run portion of a 70.3, when many triathletes start to really struggle. Now, carb loading has been shown to improve endurance performance by about 2 to 3%. You might be thinking, James, that doesn't sound like that much, but over the course of a 70.3, these could be the differences in time that you could get from carb loading properly. I don't know about you, but for eating some extra carbs before a race, this seems worth it to me. And that's before we even consider the mental benefits of not hitting the wall and instead feeling like you're getting into your stride towards the end of the race, rather than struggling and watching people come past you and you're stuck in that miserable slow hole. Some triathletes and coaches have good intentions with carb loading, and they half recognize that it's important, but they still get it wrong because they misunderstand exactly what it is. So let's clear up some misconceptions and talk about what carb loading isn't. It isn't just eating a big pasta meal the night before, nor is it just you eat a few extra carbs here or there 24 hours before your race. And finally, it isn't going low carb first to then super compensate. And no, that's not just because taking carbs out is no fun. Instead, it is eating a specific amount of carbohydrates in the right time frame before your race, while avoiding or reducing certain food groups. If that sounds like it could be overwhelming, then don't worry, it's not that bad, and I'm going to walk you through everything that you need to know. I'll share the tips that have worked with amateur triathletes as well as the professionals that I work with. Carb loading was actually a key strategy I worked on with Lizzie Rayner. She's a professional triathlete who has just gone from strength to strength, and optimizing her fueling was a key component of that, and she has done brilliantly. She's now won her first pro race and she came 16th in the World Championships, and she's very open about the difference nutrition has made. If you want the same sort of support as Lizzie and to really race as fast as possible, then check out The Hub, my nutrition membership for triathletes. There are heaps of different components to your membership which you'll benefit from, but one of these is a full race nutrition support package from me to make sure that you have complete confidence in all of your races. Link is in the comments and descriptions, so do go and check it out and consider joining the team. Alright, so now let's talk about how much to eat in the carb loading period for a 70.3. The guidance is to eat between 8 to 12 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight per day for 36 to 48 hours before your race. Let's say you're 70 kilos. That's 560 to 840 grams of carbohydrates, which is about 2,800 calories just from carbohydrates alone. And to give you the perspective, this is the carbohydrate content of some common foods which people might eat during a carb loading period. And this is why having a plan in place is so useful. If people just simply up their carb intake a bit compared to normal, eat a bit more pasta or rice, they won't get anywhere near the required amount of carbohydrates. I worked with a client last year who had done multiple 70.3s, but they also felt like things hadn't gone as well as they should have. Now, before we started working together, her idea of carb loading was having an extra helping of pasta the night before. When I calculated her numbers, she was getting less than half the carbs she needed for a carb loading period. So it was no wonder she kept running out of energy towards the end of the race. So fixing her carb loading strategy, as well as having a proper nutrition plan in place, made all of the difference. So now you know how much you need to eat. Let's talk about what sort of carbs you should eat. This is actually super important because it can have a significant impact on how well the carb loading goes and whether you get any sort of gastrointestinal upset or stomach upset during the carb load and your 70.3. For everyday healthy nutrition, I would normally suggest you eat whole grain carbohydrate varieties in most instances because overall the nutrient profile is healthier and it's better for you. But when it comes to carb loading, this just isn't the case. With carb loading, generally, the simpler the carb, the better. So this is one of those times to absolutely go for white bread over wholemeal, white rice over brown rice, and to make sure you include some sweets and sugary drinks in your meals. The whole grain varieties contain more fiber, more protein, and sometimes more fat, and you don't want those things in any large amount when you're carb loading. Your focus is carbs, and those other nutrients are just going to make you feel more full and potentially contribute to symptoms like bloating. There's also a higher likelihood that they will still be in your gastro tract on race day, meaning they could contribute to an upset tummy during your swim, bike, or run. Sweets and carbohydrate-based drinks are an easy way of consuming simple carbohydrates with minimal protein, fat, or fiber in them, so they work perfectly as part of a carb loading plan. It's funny, as this can feel completely alien for some triathletes if they usually focus on eating super healthy. This is actually the time to go wild with your favorite sweets. Just make sure that they aren't super high in fat as well. So things like donuts often are, they're out, sorry. Current evidence suggests that 24 hours of proper carb loading is sufficient to maximize muscle glycogen stores. My personal opinion here is that for a 70.3, I'd recommend starting about 36 to 48 hours out before your race. This gives you enough time to properly carb load and account for any light exercise, going to the race registration, and whatever else you find yourself doing. I'd also suggest transitioning to lower fiber foods 3 days before your race. Going low fiber is a crucial part of your pre-race strategy. You also don't need to go on a low carb diet before you start carb loading. We know you can get the same results from being on a standard diet and going straight into a carb loading diet in terms of your muscle glycogen storage. If you do try a low carb approach first, you'll probably end up feeling miserable and rubbish, which isn't what you want in the days before a big race. So don't do that and keep the carbs flowing. When you're carb loading, you need to keep an eye on your hydration too. From my own personal experience and from working with heaps of triathletes, it's really common to feel more thirsty than usual when you're carb loading. So keep an eye on your fluid intake and plan to drink more than usual. I usually add electrolyte tablets or just a bit of normal table salt to my drinks over the day when I'm carb loading. Unless you have a specific medical condition and you've been advised not to do this, this shouldn't be an issue, especially over the short term, because any excess salt should just be eliminated through urine. The main reason behind this thirst is that carbs are stored as glycogen, and for every 1 gram of glycogen you store 3 grams of water. So because you're consuming a much higher carb amount than usual, your body is going to have to use water from your blood plasma as storage, and hence relatively you become dehydrated and feel thirsty if you haven't proportionately increased your fluid intake as well. So the bottom line, keep up with your fluids while you carb load. This whole pre-hydration strategy is actually something I go into in much more detail in my triathlon nutrition course, the Tri-Fuel Academy, which is included in a membership to the hub. So if you want to fully dive into this and optimize your race nutrition, come and join us. Link is in the description and comment section of this video. Now you may have been listening to all of this and thinking, James, that is a heck of a lot of carbs and you're saying to eat less protein, fiber, fat, and reduce the whole meal carbs. Is this really healthy? Well, there's not really anything unhealthy about it as such. We're talking about a short 24-48 hour period of higher than usual carb intake, although depending on your training volume, you might actually be consuming this amount of carbs regularly. Your body should be able to handle this without any problem unless you already have a diagnosis like diabetes. And because it's so short, we're not really worried about vitamin or mineral deficiencies either. Plus, if you've been training for a 70.3, then it is very likely you've done a fair amount of exercise. And we know that exercise in its various forms makes the body better able to handle carbohydrates. So really, there shouldn't be any issue here, and you can carb load safely and get all those lovely performance gains. So now let's go over some extra tips for carb loading, which I think make a world of difference for 70.3 triathletes. Practice in advance. Don't just plan to do this for the first time as the actual carb load for your race. My advice would be to practice once or twice at least 4 weeks out from your race, perhaps before a big training weekend. Even if you just try it for 1 day, make sure you feel comfortable doing it and that you tolerate all of the foods that you've picked. If it doesn't work well, you've got time to change things and fine-tune it for you, so that come race day, it's no stress. Include carbohydrate-rich drinks. Make sure you include carby drinks in your plan. If you consume carbs just as whole foods, then it can feel like way too much. So liquids are an easy way of adding carbs to your day. I actually worked with a triathlete who always felt super bloated during their carb load. But by adding more carb-rich drinks, they were able to settle it down and it felt super manageable for them. Sports drinks are great for this purpose because they're usually full of simple sugars as well as a bit of sodium or salt, which will help with your hydration too. Taper your daily intake. Eat more in the morning and afternoon so that you can eat relatively less in the evening. If you've ever eaten a load of food before bed, then you'll know that uncomfortable sensation that can happen when you're just too full to sleep. You'll lie there tossing and turning, and you might even get the sweats too. And this isn't great prep before your race. Use a specific carb loading plan. Because of pretty much everything I've mentioned in this video, having a plan is the best way to carb load properly. So I would recommend that you map out all of the food that you're going to eat in your carb loading period. Work out how much carbohydrate is in it, how much protein, fat, and fiber, and make sure you're getting into that 8 to 12 grams of carbohydrates per day benchmark figure. This is something I help triathletes with in the hub, as I create personalized race nutrition plans for you. I'll factor in your preferences and make sure it's perfect for you so that you're starting your race fully stocked up and ready to go. So if this whole creating a carb loading plan seems a bit overwhelming for you, then do make sure to go and check out the hub. Link is in the comments and description section of this video. Now, as well as carb loading before your race, you need to consider your pre-race breakfast and how to actually fuel throughout the 70.3 itself, across the swim, bike, and run portions. The 70.3 distance presents unique challenges. You're racing at a higher intensity than a full Ironman, which means your fueling strategy needs to be dialed in to match that intensity without upsetting your stomach. So you can check out this video here on how to fuel your 70.3 so that you can absolutely smash it out of the park and finish with a strong run rather than a painful shuffle to the finish line.